Today is the first of three in a series on affirmatively furthering fair housing. Michael Segala here, consultant in the Central Valley, working with Fresno COG and all the COGs of the Valley on the Valley-wide REAP program. On our team, we have Robert Phipps. Can you say hello? He's a deputy director at Fresno COG, and then Randy Hatch. He's our on-staff land use planner. And then our featured panelist today is Veronica Tam with Veronica Tam Associates. Veronica, can you say hi?
Hi there.
All
I
right.
see some of the familiar names, so that's nice to see you again.
Oh, good, good. All right. A few house rules. This webinar is being recorded and it shall last about 1 hour. If you have questions, we'll take natural breaks along the way, and then we'll take a longer break at the end. You could raise your hand, use the question and answer function, or use the chat function to ask a question. This workshop, along with the other two AFFH workshops, are eligible for APA, AICP, CM credit, and the course numbers on the flyer in front of you. After this workshop, we'll send a post-workshop evaluation, and we'll send a link of the recording for this workshop, and materials that Veronica is presenting will be posted on the SJV REAP website in a day or two as well. So with that, anything else on the introduction, Robert? I think we're good. So with that, let's turn it over to Veronica so she can sort of explain what this new requirement is for your housing element updates is all about. Go ahead, Veronica.
Great, thank you. Okay, hopefully you got the opportunity to grab a cup of coffee, because this is quite heavy loaded stuff in here. So what I just wanted to go through is that what are the housing element requirements, and what is the scope of work, what's the assistance that we can offer. Just a little bit background about ourselves. VTA, we focus on doing housing related work, housing elements, a lot of housing elements, and certainly fair housing analysis. We've been involved in fair housing analysis for more than 20 years, ever since there was the requirement to do fair housing analysis by HUD. And so far we've gotten probably more than 30-40 housing elements through HCD for the 6-cycle housing element, including the AFFH. So we come in have a little bit of background in this whole requirement. So, obviously the affirmatively furthering fair housing, the goal is to eliminate housing discrimination and all of that. That's coming from fair housing laws. This is more about the AFFH is less about specific direct investigation of housing discrimination, but it has more to about equal opportunity. So from the housing element perspective, from the lens of the housing element, you're looking for more like equal opportunities, less about specific housing discrimination acts. Like you're not the legal representation of your residents, so you can't like sue. Usually you don't sue a resident or a landlord or anything like that. So it's not about that. It's more about equal opportunities. Some of the backgrounds about fair housing laws. Obviously, there's the Fair Housing Act. But this whole affirmatively furthering fair housing actually came in from HUD's AFFH rule, 2016, that came in with the AFFH rule that requires an assessment of fair housing that has the very extensive scope of assessment as well. But that was officially repealed in 2019. And so that's kind of interesting that the state took the 2016 AFFH rule from the Fed and say, we are going to absorb it into the housing element law. Right after they did that in 2018 and 2019, the HUD came out and say this rule just been repealed. So you're not really required to do it on a federal level, but now you are required to do it in the local California, the individual jurisdiction level. And so what makes it very difficult is that in the AFFH rule, it's designed for jurisdictions with population over 50,000. That's the HUD entitlement jurisdictions. But when it's taken into and incorporated into the California housing element law, it applies to every single jurisdiction that has to do a housing element regardless of size. So it's more onerous. It's equally onerous. I shouldn't say more onerous. It's equally onerous for any jurisdictions regardless of your population size. So in 2021, HCD issued a guidance on how to comply with this AFFH rule. But the guidance itself is 72 pages. And so that's gives you an idea how extensive it is. And if you ask me, this round of the housing element is in fact the most difficult cycle of housing element you had ever experienced. And to comply with the AFFH requirements is going to be very difficult as well. Now, I mentioned before, this originated from the HUD entitlement programs, the formula programs, the CDBG, Home, ESG, HOPWA. Those entitlement jurisdictions were required to do an assessment of fair housing and comply with the AFFH rule. It originated from that. But even from that, it's nowhere near the requirement that you have to deal with at the state level. And because actually for the AFFH, you are required to do the assessment of fair housing. It had to be approved by HUD, but HUD's review is a little less stringent than the state. But now that it applies to every jurisdiction, regardless of size, the requirements that some of you may be familiar with your requirements under CDBG, don't think that that's going to really help you. It's not going to get you, it's nowhere near what you're going to need in your housing element. Now, you might have done a regional analysis of impediments to fair housing choice, or you've done an individual one in analysis of impediments to fair housing choice, AI, for your jurisdiction, for your CDBG program. You may be able to rely on some of the information you could use from the AI, but 90% of the stuff that you need to put in the housing element, I can guarantee you, is not in your AI. So now that I've scared you a little bit, let me scare you a little bit more about the analysis. Typically it has 5 categories of analysis we have to do: fair housing, enforcement, and outreach. What you do as a local jurisdiction. You cannot just say, oh, we post it online. Oh, we refer inquiries to our fair housing service providers. If you just say that, you're not going to get through the state. You have to do proactive outreach, and you have to do a lot more than you normally do. If you don't do it now, it's going to be required in the future. Integration and segregation patterns and trends, like where concentration of low and moderate income persons, concentration of race, minority population, concentration of housing problems, concentration of also like poverty. A lot of these are related to the analysis. Racial and ethnically concentrated areas of poverty. Some of you may be familiar with that when you work with the CDBG program, the recap, but that is one side of the coin. The other side of the coin is racially concentrated areas of affluence. You also have to look at, why is there a concentration? Where are they located? How do you plan on addressing those conditions, especially in relation to how you plan your housing in the future? Disparities in access to opportunities. We look at jobs, transportation, education, healthy environment, basically your TCAC, allocation categories. Disproportionate housing needs and displacement, that's like concentration of overcrowding, concentration of housing cost burden, concentration of displacement. Now, some of these discussions you're already in the housing element, but it doesn't necessarily have a geographic kind of discussion about it. Typically in a housing element, you say X% of our households have this, X% of our household has had that. But in the AFFH, the question is, where are they concentrated? And so it's not just 20%, 5%, or we only have 5% of overcrowded households. In the past, that's fine. But if that 5% is only in one area, that's not fine with the AFFH perspective. So that's an additional thing that you have to talk about. Existing conditions and your local context right now. And then more importantly, how is your strategy to meet your regional housing needs allocation? What's the distribution of your sites? Are you concentrating low-income housing in areas that are already primarily low income? Now, that in the past, of course, may get a little bit frowned on, but there's nothing for HCD to latch onto to say that you need to do more. But with the AFFH, they can tell you, no, you need to do more than that. You need to do better than that. And then the last portion of it is the meaningful actions. Meaningful actions is not what you do. It's what you do above and beyond what you normally do to bridge the disparities. If your housing programs contain a lot of ongoing, continue to do this citywide, that is not a meaningful action from an AFFH perspective, because you're treating everybody equally doesn't mean that you're treating the people equitably. And so that's the whole point, is what you do differently this time. What do you do extra in order to bridge the disparity? So the analysis of the I don't know about generally how small can you make it to be, but usually this AFFH analysis is at least 70 to 80 pages long, and I tell people like Berkeley that we did is about 180 pages. So it depends on the complexity of your community. It can be a very extensive analysis. Fair housing outreach, like I said, what is your ability to disseminate information? So, and beyond your normal process. Posting online is not considered an outreach activity. That's a passive way of notifying people. Is not an active, meaningful action is to outreach. So you cannot just leave it to your fair housing service providers. And some of you may not even know who is your fair housing service providers because you participate in some fair housing programs through your county's CDBG programs. Some of you don't even have that requirement because you apply directly to the state for your CDBG funds, and you get money once in 2-3 years, and you don't really have this kind of requirement. But all of that is going to have to change. You have to do beyond what you normally do, and you have to take a much more active role in terms of promoting housing, fair housing, even as a participant in the CDBG urban county program that normally you don't have to do anything, but for housing element obligation you do. So how do you implement your programs to bridge disparities? So like if you have a rehab program, how do you do above and beyond? How do you proactively outreach to the underserved populations and let them know of resources? Can you prioritize funding in a particular neighborhoods because it has concentrated issues? So again, continue to do something citywide is not going to meet your fair housing, your AFFH requirements. Integration, segregation patterns and trends. And I think, these are the things I'm just telling you the scope of analysis. Most of the time, it's more likely that either your consultant for your housing element will do it, or that, if you ask one of the consultants on the bench to help you. But we have to look at race, disability, familial status, income, and we also have to look at local and regional trends. And we also have to look at local knowledge, their historical background in your community that contributes to this kind of concentration of segregation. I talked about racially and ethnically concentrated areas of poverty. That is an official definition at in HUD, but there is also racially concentrated areas of affluence is a little bit less defined, but HCD does have a definition. But we also found there's another definition out there, I think from HUD's white paper. It's primarily focusing on what concentration of white population with median income over 150,000. And so that's well, household income over 150,000. So that is considered areas of affluence. So when you do your outreach, you have to pay attention to these two areas. When you do program implementation, you also have to pay attention to that if you have either one. Disparity in access to opportunities, and this analysis, I think I talked about that. It covers a scope, a range of analysis, like how well certain groups have access to these, good education, the schools, employment, transportation. They located in census tract that has a poor Cal and Forest Green score. So all of these looks at whether there are specific concentrated areas that you need to pay attention to. Disproportionate needs, cost burden, overcrowding, displacement. Everything has to be compared, look at locally and regionally. And Michael, I did get a response back. You saw that I got a response back from Paul Madugo. He thinks county level is fine for regional, but then he also thinks that there may be some other kind of ways of look at sub-regional analysis. So we'll talk to him later on about that. Meaningful actions. No business as usual, must do above and beyond. That's very, very, very important to HCD. All the meaningful actions are focused on 5 themes. You have to have actions in each one of these themes. Fair housing outreach and enforcement, mobility. How do your programs facilitate locational choices, variety of housing types? How do you help people move to their location of their choices? How do you, what are the programs in your housing element that looks at more alternative housing types or provide or diversify your housing stock? If you're primarily single family right now, how do you do multifamily? How do you do supportive housing, transitional housing, micro units, and project home key, or any type of like alternative housing types? What do you do to diversify your housing stock? New opportunities in high resource areas, that's almost most critical, because HC wants to look at how you are choosing your sites. Are you concentrated your sites in particular areas? And if so, and they're primarily in lower resource areas, what extra efforts that you're going to do to encourage more housing to be developed in high resource areas. Now, a lot of the times you cannot avoid some concentration, because the whole concept of transit-oriented development, that was a statewide goal. That's also good planning and that we're being also incentivized to do. But on the other hand, a lot of high TOD areas are areas that are lower income and are areas with high minority concentration. You're running into issues with displacement. So then if you're promoting more housing in those areas, what are the complementary programs and strategies you need to do tenant protections and anti-displacement? And if you are putting a lot of housing in a lower income area, how do you do place place-based strategies for neighborhood improvements. How do you improve not just building housing, but improves the neighborhood conditions? Now, a lot of these may not be necessarily just housing programs. It can be programs and actions that you do in your EJ element, in your safe transportation, like complete street efforts. It can be your public improvements. It can be with your CDBG programs that kind of put it all together. Place-based strategies also includes, for example, if you say, well, we're putting all the housing in the high resource areas. But if you have neighborhoods that are low and moderate income, concentrated populations of low and moderate income, your place-based strategies could be, how do you improve the conditions of those neighborhoods? So you have new construction on the one hand, but you also have concentrated efforts to improve the living, suitable living environment for the low and moderate income households right now. Another way to look at that is, if you're putting a lot of housing, if you're converting a lot of commercial land or industrial land into housing as part of your RHNA strategy, how are the neighborhood-based improvements you would need to turn a non-residential neighborhood into a mixed use and residential neighborhoods? What are the complementary improvements that you need to make? So the meaningful actions go beyond just housing programs. So that's the part that you would need to involve your other departments when you're developing your meaningful actions. So in terms of our scope of assistance, when we responded to the proposal, the RFP has kind of like some parameters of what, how much time we should budget for different types of analysis. So based on my experience, we are currently providing AFFH technical assistance to jurisdictions in Marin County. We're also doing some of that for Contra Costa County. And so based on that, we've kind of come up with 5 different types of assistance or tasks we can help you with. One is analyzing your RHNA sites by AFFH factors. Now, your consultant, or if you're doing your housing element in-house, very few cities do, but some do that in-house. But we can work with your, what we ask for is like you give us your RHNA sites in a particular format that we're looking for. We do, our GIS guy will do the analysis based on AFFH factors and give you some maps and tables to look at, and then we'll have a meeting with you to go over what we see may potentially be an issue. And what you could possibly do to balance out some of your site selection. Then, you choose to rebalance your site's inventory, then we'll do a second round analysis, and then we'll give you summary tables and maps that you can incorporate into your housing element. So this is like an example in Marin County, Corte Madera, and so when we looked at the site inventory, said, okay, everything is just right here. Then explain what is your strategy for putting more housing in other parts of the city. Why is this the best strategy? What are the constraints that you have for not putting it somewhere else? I think with Corte Madera, we end up reworking the site's inventory, like we analyzing it for about 3 or 4 times because they keep changing it, knowing that they may have a little bit of issues here and there. We can also offer office hours that you can kind of present your ideas or programs or issues that we can help you with kind of strategizing either the site strategy or meaningful actions, however you want to use the office hours. We could also help to actually develop the AFFH analysis if it's depending on whether that's part of your scope with the consultant, or that whether you want to rearrange it, we can provide different levels of assistance for helping with doing the analysis. We can also do peer review of what your consultant has done, and that's obviously sensitive to some extent, that we don't claim to know it all, but we've done a lot of these and we have a lot of experience working through HCD for the San Diego region, the SCAG region, and the ABAG region now. And so, we certainly can offer some, like brainstorm it with you about, the analysis of meaningful actions, whether we think it's there or not. We can also assist you to address HCD's comments when they came back from HCD. So there are different things that we can do, tasks we can do. So this is like, this is Berkeley. On top of just like looking things at census tracts or percentages and all of that, HCD also wants you to divide the cities into neighborhoods, and like they don't say that it's absolutely required, but if it's a large city, it's going to get you through HCD a lot faster, because when they look at the analysis and then you say, okay, X% is located in census tract with high percentage of low mod, and HCD's comment come back would be, but where? Like, we still don't know how the distribution is like. So typically, the analysis that we do, the distribution arena sites by AFFH factor, we also ask you to provide us some division of your city into neighborhoods that make sense to your residents. Sometimes the general plan would have that kind of division. Neighborhood, like that's very defined. Your residents know automatically when you say, the Rolling Heights or whatever, then they know exactly where that is. If you have that type of thing, we usually at least divide the city into like quadrants, so that there is more a relative location and relative distribution throughout the parts of the city. So this is Berkeley. We had to divide the city into, I think, 14 different neighborhoods, 14 or 16 neighborhoods, quite a few. But this shows like the overall distribution and the characteristics of those neighborhoods. And this is not, again, it's not a requirement, but it's highly recommended by HCD. So when we responded to the RFP, there are 3 levels of assistance. But one thing that I do want to emphasize is that the scope of work that we have and the budget that we have is not intended to produce a turnkey product. But it's also not recommended either. I think HCD really values staff knowledge, local context, that only you as a jurisdiction and staff may know some of the things, the history, what you do, what you think are the reasons for certain patterns to occur. They probably would frown on it if it's just like a turnkey product and attached to the back of the housing element as an appendix. So I think the way that we've envisioned this and the way we've been working with Marin County jurisdictions and some Contra Costa County jurisdictions is we provide a lot of the technical assistance, but we need you to supply the local context and knowledge. And so this is more a collaborative, work relationship and product. I think Michael and I and the other consultants were talking about, how to coordinate. But most likely the consultants will provide the county level analysis and discussions that jurisdictions can just use, because there is no reason to to have every one of you do the same county level discussions, and it can be more cost saving, but we're still working on that. At the jurisdictional level is 3 levels of assistance. It's a light, medium, and heavy assistance. So I'm dividing it into the 5 different types of tasks that I talked about earlier. At the very light level, it's about 10 hours of assistance. So the way I'm suggesting using that is that you can do an office hour, a few office hours that we can, more flexibly use it. And then depending on whether you want to use it on even on some of the tasks is okay, but we can also use that more flexibly for you to ask questions that are targeted for your situation. And then we can do peer review. We can also assist you in addressing HCD comments when it comes back on AFFH. But obviously the general light level has 10 hours of our assistance. This is just my suggestion of how we could use those 10 hours. You are welcome to, change that, obviously. The medium level is the 25 hours or so. We had envisioned that we can probably use the bulk of it on your sites inventory to provide the AFFH analysis using the sites inventory that you provide, and the product would be a set of maps and tables and analysis, and we'll have a meeting with you through the office hours and to kind of go over the analysis. Then similar, other assistance. But again, it's just my suggestion. The more heavy one is 50 hours that we do more of the analysis for you in the AFFH. But again, at 50 hours, to be very honest, is nowhere near what is actually needed to do a complete analysis. Let's say Berkeley is easily a $30,000 effort, but Berkeley is Berkeley. It's not everybody has to go to that level because the population and the issues are far more complex given their history. But 50 hours can get us a lot of the analysis, and certainly if the regional analysis is regional context is being done separately, then 50 hours would get you quite far already. So, but that's based on the RFP requirements. So that's all I want to cover today. In a month or so, I want to come back and kind of give some suggestions about what you need to pay attention to when you're selecting your sites. So, but I'll be happy to answer if you have any questions or suggestions how we can kind of work with that. But the main thing that I do want to emphasize is this takes a long time. And if you would like assistance, you would want to start early because it's not something that we can turn around and get it done in 2 weeks. It takes a lot of research, it takes a lot of data, it takes a lot of time to do it, especially if you want to go to the heavy loaded level. I would really encourage to let Michael or Robert knows ahead of time, who would you like, which jurisdictions would like assistance, what level assistance would you like, so that we can plan ahead among the different consultants. I think there are three consultants together. So, okay, that's all I have.
Veronica, can you stop share so I can see the flyer again here?
Yeah.
All right, so thank you very much, Veronica, for that overview and for that dive into the type of assistance that's available. When she's talking about assistance, that means the Valley-wide REAP program has Veronica, Rincon, Estelano under contract to provide assistance to cities. And so, I suggest that you talk to your MPO representative too before reaching out to us so we can have a better understanding of where people are at. For example, four of the 8 counties are doing multi-jurisdictional housing elements. Those have an AFFH scope in some of them don't. Some of our MPO partners are individually offering AFFH assistance. So we just kind of have to figure it out, but resources are available thanks to HCD to support and help you out in this first time effort of doing this analysis. So Veronica, thank you so much for clearly stating that and laying it out. And we hope that you take it up in terms of the technical assistance offer. It's a portal on our website. I'll provide the link in the chat box. But before I open it up to questions, I would like to hear from Randy and or Robert as well for your comments.
Well, very, very quickly, Randy is more an expert than I am, but I did want to emphasize something that Veronica pointed out, which is that this is not a fast process. And I appreciated her comments on that because it's something that Michael and I have been emphasizing everywhere that we've been, everywhere that we've discussed this is, we're not trying to incite a panic by any means, but this is a concern because this is going to take some time and some efforts. I believe that there's only one jurisdiction in the entire state, if I remember correctly, that has had its AFFH approved and its housing element on the first swing. And so I, in my opinion, cannot overemphasize how important it is to get going on this, which is why we, conceived of this 3-part series. Michael conceived of it, that we are trying to emphasize so thoroughly the need to get this going, to make these resources available to the jurisdictions through our MPOs to get this started, because we think that this is going to take some significant time, require significant effort, and would rather get started sooner than later. So with that, I'm happy to hand it off to Randy.
Well, I agree with all of your comments, Robert. This is a big deal. And if so many of our jurisdictions here in the Valley are relatively small and may have only 1 or 2 planners or a contract planner doing everything. And so this rapidly becomes overwhelming for those small jurisdictions with limited staffing resources. So starting that process, I mean, most of us have already started figuring out what we're going to do about the housing element. I've been in this business for over 40 years. I've done a lot of housing elements for a lot of cities. This is a whole different level. And I think that's something that we need to be aware of, that what we did at the last cycle is not at all an experience that we can use in our current cycle. And so I think the sooner we talk to our city managers, we talk to our city council about how we're going to approach this, and it's very clear that the short answer of, oh, let's hire a consultant to do it and not worry about it, that's not going to work for this, because local knowledge is heavily involved. And so we've got to, as local planners, be very much engaged if we do have consultant help. And I would suggest we get consultant help simply to advise us and give us guidance. The experience that such as Veronica has of going through several of these is invaluable. This is something you don't want to do for the first time cold. And so there's some hard conversations that need to be had with the city manager and mayor, and depending on how your city works, council members. And so, as everyone has said, the sooner you start that, the better it will be for you. And, I really appreciate Veronica's comments. I'm sitting here thinking, oh my God, how am I going to do this? And, we need the time to have these conversations is right now.
So with that, I think, Michael, you want to open it up for questions?
Sure,
We
sure.
have a couple of questions regarding, apparently we're missing a submit request button in Chrome and in MS Edge. So I'm not sure if that's on
Yeah,
our side.
I was not aware of that, Cynthia, and we'll look into it. It should be working, but we'll I think you have
Apologize
to
for
submit
that.
maybe you submit the security question first.
But I don't think you can do that either.
Okay, okay.
No. We'll have to look into it.
Yep, yep.
Apologize for that. We'll get that fixed right away. So if there are other questions at this time related to AFFH, happy to take those on. Just either raise your hand and we can allow you to speak, or if you want to put your question in the Q&A, either way works.
I think I've successfully scared everybody away.
Right.
Yeah, so the timing of this, Veronica, is due at the same time that our housing elements are due, which is the end of December for 6 of the 8 counties and the end of January 2024 for 2 of the 8 counties.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, I think if your housing element is due the end of December this year, frankly, your draft housing element needs to be released by May to actually adequately go through the required public review process. So I am assuming some of you are going to be late because the housing element now requires a 30-day public review and a mandatory 10 business days to respond to public comments before you can even submit it to HCD. So that's 45 days right there, a month and a half. Then the housing element needs to go through the first round of HCD review, which is 90 days. So 4.5 months are gone for public review and HCD review before you can adopt the housing element by the end of this year. And unfortunately, by the end of this year, we all know that means is Thanksgiving and Christmas time. And you most likely have only one public hearing in November, one planning commission meeting in November and December, and one in December. So your ability to adopt the housing element in November and December is limited because of the holiday season. So if you haven't started yet, you're not going to make it. Let's put it this way. And I'll be as honest as it can be, because 4.5 months already gone for public review and HCD review. And if you're back the adoption in November and December, and then you're back 4.5 months into public review and some time to revise your housing element to respond to HCD review, that means you need to release your draft housing element by May.
Okay, we do have a couple of questions in the queue. The first one, are there any good examples of balancing providing affordable housing without creating overconcentration?
Yeah, I think that the main thing is really taking a look at what HCD wants to see. One is that you do look at areas that are not primarily concentrated in like your downtown area, or that your transit corridor, that there are other additional locations that you can rezone and upzone for housing. The other strategies is definitely missing middle, looking at medium density neighborhoods. They're also looking at ADUs in SB9. That's the ability to put in more affordable housing into the higher resource, lower density neighborhoods. Now, if you are being considered primarily very low income and primarily like exclusive neighborhoods, and then they would actually require you to increase the density in some of your lower density zones. So, but I think generally utilizing ADUs, SB9, middle, and also maybe converting, adding housing as an allowable uses in some of your commercial areas that may be considered as higher resource. Maybe those are the strategies so that you're not putting housing in the conventional way. To some extent, is exactly what TCAC, you're doing the opposite of what TCAC allocation is. So that's the whole point that we always argue, that a lot of times like state laws do conflict, their goals do conflict.
And this might be a good opportunity to plug a study that we're in the middle of right now, which is the inclusionary zoning study to, compare those jurisdictions, particularly in the Valley, that have inclusionary zoning policies with those that might benefit from them. So we hope to have that very, very shortly here. So
yeah, thank you, Robert. That's a good suggestion. Yeah, looking at inclusionary, that's definitely one way to balance out your concentration. And doing mixed income in your site strategy, that I think the next questions. Even though you're allowed to say that because it's 20 units to the acre or 30 units to the acre, so therefore they are qualified as a low income site, do not try to slap a whole bunch of units into one giant site, because you could. Especially for large sites, you want to use mixed income strategies, like conversion of shopping malls. That's one way of looking at, but you can put a lot of units in it. That's a very strong trend of converting to shopping malls, or integrating housing into shopping malls. But that kind of large sites, you would want to use more mixed income strategies, because one is closer to reality, two, you're not concentrating, three, you're protecting yourself against the SB 166 requirement, the no net loss, because the moment the housing built on those shopping centers, they're not going to have a lot of affordable units. So the larger the number that you concentrate in one site, you have more AFFH issues, but you also create more problems for yourself down the line for no net loss requirements. So I think like mixed income strategies is definitely one way to look at it. That actually also had somebody asked a question on comments on that. It's religious facilities. That's doing an overlay or not an overlay. However, you're depending on how your religious facilities are usually zoned. That may be one way to get to deconcentrating affordable housing. Now, because a lot of the churches and all that are actually typically located in lower density residential neighborhoods, but they are by law to allow for housing because of the new requirements. Well, not by law to allow, but then they facilitate building affordable housing. So you could use a different strategy to actually allow slightly higher density on religious properties, and therefore facilitating the deconcentration of affordable housing and partnership with nonprofit. I have a client that actually just say religious facilities, small ones, even they're just like a single family property, regardless of their zone, they're allowed to have an ADU and a JADU. And I have another jurisdiction that said we're going to allow them up to 4 units. If it's a religious facility, they can build at the parking lot, whatever they want to do. Even they're small, they can just do a 4 unit. So that's some of the strategies that you can try.
Okay, next question is with regard to general takeaways regarding AFFH when looking at sites.
I think those are some of the comments that I just made relating to, but I think it's definitely when you're looking at sites, you look at your objective criteria for selecting sites, right? You look at whether they're vacant, whether they're developer interest, whether they're owner interest, whether it's an aging and deteriorating property. You look at all of that. But plot them out, and then one of the things that we can suggest too is one of our initial kind of analysis is the light analysis is give you a set of maps that you can look at and what are the AFFH factors. So then you can plot it against your at least you have some ideas, like are we putting all of our sites in the bad areas? Then I think that's something that you may want to, we can think about. Maybe that's an initial kind of assistance, but definitely look to not concentrating by doing mixed income strategies for large sites.
Okay. Why don't we skip down to a question from Brian Stice. What's a reasonable percentage of the total housing element cost that the AFFH component would typically comprise?
Oh, I don't want to answer that question because it ranges a lot and like I say, Berkeley is easily a $30,000 job because we did a lot of work in there. But typically, I would say it's about, I think the San Joaquin County COG budgeted about $15,000 to $20,000 per jurisdiction for the heavy budget. Is that correct, Robert or Michael?
Well, that that's for the technical assistance, like you said, not intended to be a turnkey approach.
Right.
So the
Yeah.
the question is in terms of for the when you look at it as a percentage of the total housing element.
I don't know, because sometimes housing element can range so high, like because of the outreach that you want to do, because of the RENA, because of the EIR and all of that. But I would say that it can easily be about 15 to 20%, probably about 15% of that budget. And I can also be very honest about this. HCD did call me before and ask me how much do I usually charge, because they want to use it to gauge how they approve SB2 application, like budget allocation for other jurisdictions, because they did come, like they did ask me, like, generally how much does it cost for you to do something, so that they can tell whether certain things are higher or lower. So I think usually our budget is probably in the middle, and I think that's the reason why they ask us.
Okay.
I don't see any other questions.
There's a Stockton.
Yeah, Matt Diaz has a comment that the market in Stockton, either AMI or VLI, as our code allows most of what you proposed. So,
Okay.
yeah, not a question, just a comment.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah, so maybe that's it.
Yep, and we're pretty much right on time here, so.
Yeah. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Veronica, Randy, Robert, very informative. We look forward to the next workshop. Veronica's handling this one on April 18th as well. Then on May 16th, we have Rincon and Estelano Advisors as well, providing another workshop. So hopefully this spurs the interest and gets you motivated. You still have time, and move forward, and we'll talk to everyone soon. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your time. Bye-bye.